growing
good.
season.
Yeah.
This might be all of us today. I know there's a couple members who aren't here. They might join, but we can go ahead and get started. Before we start talking though, I wanna do some introductions because we have a guest, Barbara Johnson from Labella Associates. If you look around the room, you can see the name of her firm all over these maps. And I know a couple of you may not have worked with Barbara before, so for your benefit and ours, do you wanna go around the room and introduce?
Sure. I'm Shannon Chevier, and I'm newly on the zoning board.
Morning, Barb. Chuck Euler, planning board.
Hi, Gary Kokersberger. I'm on the Environmental Conservation Board.
Tom Schwartz.
Karen Parkhurst, I'm on this board, Affordable Housing, Parks and Rec.
CIC.
CIC.
Kim Burkhardt, Environmental Conservation Board.
And for those of you who don't know Barbara, we have worked with Labella on a lot of projects, Ag Enhancement Plan, our Open Space Conservation and Scenic Views Master Plan, that was in 2018. The Ag Plan was in 2016. And then again, we worked with them in 2020 was for our Natural Resources Inventory Update. So we've been working, and Barbara has always been our main point of contact. So we've been working with her for years. They seem to be our go-to firm for everything related to this group, basically.
Natural resource open space plan.
Oh, yeah, conservation and everything. I mean, we use your maps all the time. So, Eric, do you want to introduce yourself? We just went around the room for Barbara's benefit to kind of make sure she knew who everybody was.
All right. Hi, Barb. Welcome. Eric Open.
He's on the ECB also. So thanks for coming. I think I told you before when I invited you to come, at one of our meetings, maybe a couple meetings ago, we poured over not all the maps that you guys made, but a lot of them, and kind of took a look at them. It's been a while since any of them were made, and then this group is starting to look at trying to hone in on identifying the most, let's use that word again, valuable parcels from our point of view that would be worthwhile to protect. And we have so many maps, but they don't, what we've observed is they don't always agree. And I know some of that was intentional because the maps were, for example, focused on agriculture or water or you know, the biggest bang for your buck in protecting parcels. And so we wanted to bring you here so to kind of help us remember some of the intent with these maps, but also maybe talk about possibilities of updating some of them. Some of them we've had changes, and then also perhaps combining, or whether it's an all new map, something that could be used by this group, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the maps we spent a lot of time on was the lands of conservation value.
Right,
Up
we
there,
can
you
move the
can't-
TV a little.
It's-
Can
yeah.
can you roll that over?
I
'Cause
will.
I wanted to speak to that a little bit, because you were talking about combining, that's really the only one that combines.
Yeah, well,
you know,
one
all
of the things,
features into one.
and we found, you know, this map is definitely useful and I like it, but one of the things I personally don't like is that the weighting factor leaves out parcels that I think are important just because they're small. A lot of the parcels that this map points out, you know, the ones near water or near a stream, get not ignored, but they get ranked much lower, and I kind of disagree with that. I understand the point of this map, but that was some of the things, like we were said, well, could we just use this map instead? But then of course it doesn't look at other things like land cover, it only looks at water.
Which is the other one you're showing as an alternative?
It was from the Ag Enhancement Plan.
The first one.
It's really just,
Okay.
yeah, it says natural resources rating, but it tends to focus parcels that are abutting water or on a stream.
Right.
I'll move this now.
And of course, since then, you know, that was based on the ag and markets criteria for the natural resources, which
Can
they
you
since
see
changed.
that
That's
now?
perfect, yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
It did cover the,
Oh,
I'll let you keep.
we don't have anyone on Zoom, but that would
Yeah.
make it interesting for
perfect.
the recording.
whatever.
Why don't you take this off the wall and hold it?
That's,
Yeah,
I remember it now, you can move the
Here,
TV back.
look back here.
Yeah,
There you go.
it's all right.
there you go.
Are people watching?
No, no one's on,
No one's on.
but I will move it back because it looks funny.
Oh, thank you.
We can't see Kim.
It's all right. I'm good.
Okay. It's been a couple meetings since we talked about it. Besides that, does anyone else remember any of the questions we had? Or should we just kind of bring them up and kind of do a once over with you, Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd be interested in what your specific questions are, and kind of mulling over what you said and how to respond, but I guess I'd be better if people could articulate exactly, well, I guess I'll just preface everything. I mean, the reason why we have a series of maps is, as you said, Sarah, there are all these resources, and they don't really add up to one big resource. We tried, with the rating system, and that was kind of more for land acquisition, where you probably, unless it was a super special ecological, site, size was one of the considerations because you wanted to preserve a lot of land. And there's a lot of ways to do it. So you can't really add them up. So we would like you to be able to look at them all, and I don't think everything's on Encore yet, is it?
No, not really any of these.
And, we kind of got to a stopping point, I'll just call it. They're like, do you have more backup on the data? And then we never really finished that conversation. But if you had them on Encore, or you could have your own online portal with just these maps. It's not that hard to set that up, and it's actually not that expensive, so that's something to consider. But if you can imagine like overlaying them one at a time, then you can see all the things that are there, and you can kind of look at parcel by parcel, like flip, like a transparencies, right? It's like, what
So do you have these as layers?
they're all right, yes. So when we made these maps, that was kind of before everything was online,
Right,
and we needed to have the paper maps, and they were in a fold-out book. It's very nice. You need that, but what's nice now, it's so much easier to just host these online, and we do that a lot now. We didn't used to do it a lot. We do it a lot now. And we could demo that for you even. It's similar to Encore. Encore's like a gold standard, but it's like really big and technical, and they can't put anything up there unless they have all the documentation and know exactly where it came from. They have very, but since we made these maps for you, you know where they came from and the caveats and so forth. We can kind of keep it there. And I think that was the holdup with the county, is they wanted everything to be, well documented. And when we created the layers,
Yeah,
I'm
some
not
of
sure
these are a
how
little
well we
more-
kept up with the documentation on all the layers, because we fiddled with some of them and we updated them from aerial photos, and they wanted everything to be very explained. But we could make if you can imagine flipping the ecological communities. So just to back up on that map, that was based on data that was collected a long time ago.
2002.
Yes, and when we did that sample conservation subdivision, you might recall, it had a rare ecosystem as part of it. They're like, well, that doesn't exist anymore, it's dried up. It's no longer a maple ash swamp, it's no longer a swamp at all, it's all dried up. So things have changed. And we knew that. It was like, this is a guide, this is a first cut. If this is coming up as rare ecological community, go check and see if it's still true.
So how does that information get to you? Yeah, somebody actually physically is going out and
Well,
checking that out?
well, when we made the maps, the data set for the maps was done as a project by Finger Lakes Community
Right.
College and Ontario County. And they've done some updating, but it's, the professor who does it.
He retired.
I was gonna say, he must have retired.
It was Bruce Gilmore,
Yes,
wasn't
it
it?
was.
Yes. Gilman.
Yes.
Or sorry, thank you.
So that, it was a great data set, and we're like, this is fantastic. We can just overlay things. It's somebody did a lot of research. They did it from aerial photos with a little bit of field checking. So at the time it was excellent,
Yeah.
but now it's 20 years old.
Oh.
And some fields have grown up to forest. Some shrubland might have been cleared for farmland, and when we did the ag plan, we did tweak it a little bit and made some edits just based on aerial photos, areas that have been done. And actually, our partner who worked on that apparently did extra work because the person doing the mapping was so into it. It's like, oh, we're gonna really tweak this. So it was updated for the farmland plan.
So does that mean that the open space conservation and scenic views master plan should be changed or amended?
Well, we don't have better data. I mean, I think it's still a good
Still
guide, but
valid.
it's like this is like townwide, so you just have to look at it as this is a townwide map. And you don't wanna plan for a parcel specific
Right, right.
without going there and checking. I think it's still, there's just caveats that you need to know about when you're using the map data. So that's the ecological communities, which we used as a base because it was land cover and it was based on aerial photos, is the most accurate we had. And, we overlaid the streams, the steep slopes, that's something you can measure. Those are still good. The vistas from the lake, those still you can measure, they don't account for vegetation, so if there's a tree in front of you, you can't see the lake and vice versa.
So, but what wouldn't be on these is the highly populated areas, for example, the Morel development that has experienced a building boom
Right,
in the last 20 years.
if some of those parcels have been developed,
Yeah.
they may still be shown as open space or farmland,
Yeah.
correct? Right, so those updates, those would be, that could be updated, the obvious ones.
Sure,
Or you
that's-
could, just depending on how you wanna scope it out, do more, look at the aerial photos and update the land cover. I mean, I guess, think about what that would take, you know? They had the benefit of using students, free labor. But, there are, companies that do it, have young, GIS savvy and ecological savvy people who can look at aerial photos and use a cut and go visit and see if we can update it. Ovella does too, so, I mean, that's
It would be nice if
that's something
They
we consider
repeated
as a
that
townwide
project.
basis. Yeah. And then, of course, we had when we were doing, I think it was the natural resource inventory, we had a consultant come in, it's like, well, what about the vernal pools and the tiny little wetlands that you can only find through drones? It's like, yeah, that would be nice too. Scan the whole town for the tiny little things.
when a tree falls down in the woods and creates a new vernal pool, you can't really
Right,
map all
and
of
that was
those.
my, it's like you can plan for that and you can do a map, but it's gonna be outdated tomorrow. I think it might be better to just wait till something comes up in a particular area and then do a survey for that small area where you have a project that's underway. Just for economy and practicality. But if you had an overlay and you could just say, well, this is the land cover, and land cover is updated through satellites too, which we didn't use for this because we had better data, but when we do these maps now, we just use the land cover satellite data, which isn't as high, isn't as accurate. If you zoom in, you'll definitely see little squares. But it's a nice scan, that would
Yeah.
be something to scan for to see if it was updatable. But if you had overlays and you can zoom into one parcel, you can say, oh, what's the ecological community that we said it was? Is there any farmland here? Do you have an aerial photo so you can look and check, right away if it's been built on? Is there a stream? Is there, anything nearby that's like a public area or protected lands? How far from the stream? So it's not, you can do that, and some of that you can do in Encore. I don't think they have. Well, they do have this.
They do have
It's
the
not
ecological
it's not the exact
communities.
same database because
layer.
we did some updating with the town's ag plan,
Yeah.
so it's not the exact same layer.
Although theirs is difficult because, I think you can change the transparency level, but you have to dig in to do it. So when you first turn on the layer, it's you can't see, it's
That's-
opaque.
That's all you can see.
Yeah. So you have to zoom out. It gets a little funky.
That's an encore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great tool, but maybe it's not maybe it's a little cumbersome.
It's
for-
great. It gets better the better you get at using it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of there's just a lot of information on it. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's hard to figure out answers to your questions depending on how many different data layers you're gonna need to use, and you need to toggle them on and off? Do you need to turn off parts of it? Yeah, it gets funky.
So I'd be interested what questions you have, that you use the maps for, what situations you're using them for, because that's always helpful to how to, design
Maybe-
a product that would help.
I can start with like kind of what this group's goal is, kind of starting from this year. I mean, you've been involved with this group in past iterations, but so we kind of renewed it this year. You can tell we've got some new members. And there's been a lot of talk about parcel acquisition by the town recently. Different types of parcels, woods, lakefront, etc. And there's not a clear path for the town to follow. So we end up just looking at, I mean, I guess it's probably the best thing we have to do right now. You look at the parcel, you look at the maps, but again, the maps don't always agree with whether the parcel is quote unquote valuable and worthwhile to protect by the town, because it depends on what you're looking at, And as you said, there isn't one golden standard that says, yes, this one's good. And our goal is to try to help kind of come up with a ranking. Like if we had a certain amount of money, which parcel would you pick, And if you, depending on which map you look at, it would be different parcels. That was where this discussion started. It just depended. And so there are smaller parcels that just didn't even show up as being valuable. Especially like some of the lakefront parcels, and I know it's because they're little, but you would think with lands of conservation value that anything on water should probably show up.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't on this because they're too small.
Give Barb the example of the RSM project.
Right.
Oh, yeah, well, that was
That's
a shining
That's a
example.
classic.
There's a parcel on the lake that the town board was back and forth over whether to purchase. We had an opportunity to purchase it a couple years ago, and they didn't, and then the people pushed it to the forefront again just recently. Again, they decided not to. It's small, very small. I can't remember how big it is. The lakefront portion isn't even an acre. Do you know how big that piece is on the water?
I think altogether it was like
7 acres, but the lakefront.
the lake, just south of German Brothers,
Okay.
immediately south of German Brothers, it was 400 and something feet. of
400
lake-
and something feet of shoreline, but
of
it's between a
lake frontage.
guardrail and the lake, and I mean, it's,
But
maybe
nasty lake frontage. but
20 to 30
It's all
feet.
that was left
Yeah.
essentially, in a little upland
The other side. of the
parcel
road,
that
yeah.
could be used for parking or access from the Morel project.
potential for trail connection
We have-
between uplands and the lake, and just an undeveloped chunk of shoreline. It was not on any of our maps, so
That didn't help the case. did
It
it
didn't
doesn't
help
help
the
the
case,
case.
right.
Frankly, though, I don't know, Tom, if it would have helped the case anyway, but it would have been nice to be able to show that. I mean, it's kind of like, well, we all know that lakefront property is important ecologically and for all kinds of reasons, but that was one example of, a parcel that,
That is forever gone.
well, yeah, and it's naturally, it's going to be water protection and stuff like that, just because it's very nature of being on the water.
The other issue is perpetually, whenever there's a survey of citizens, what would you like? One of the top things is more lake access. And with the Morel
access.
project immediately above, that would have been certainly beneficial to, I don't know, how many other homes up there, 300-400 homes eventually?
Mhm.
Morel?
Yeah. That would have been another access. I mean, we've got, where the schoolhouse is on the Westlake Road. I mean, it's teeny, but usable access. It would be another thing like that, but it didn't happen. And it was a 2-2 vote.
So how does these properties come to you? I guess there's two ways to approach land conservation. One, and it's similar to what, some counties do for like farmland protection. It's like they collect nominations, then they have criteria to evaluate them. you don't like start with a map and say, oh, that's our priority, let's see if they wanna sell. You know, so, I mean, that's another way to go about it, is just have your criteria. And you
What-
can say, like, access is top priority,
What has happened recently, at least, is properties go for sale.
right?
And then someone says, hey, should the town buy that? And it
Right.
starts the conversation.
Right.
It's a reaction,
Yeah,
a
exactly.
reaction instead of
Mhm.
pre.
It's not
But what is
planning
the
ahead.
alternative? I mean,
Right, the alternative, I
Like-
guess, is like what we tried to do with your mapping projects is, you know, identify ahead of time what would be a good idea if
Did you
it did
actually-
ever become available. So that kind of is a good segue. We're working on a policy. We have a funding policy in place already. We have an open space fund and we have rules for how the town can spend it, what they're allowed to spend it on, and how it's funded, how we put money into it. What we don't have is any sort of policy that the town board can use to help them make decisions on
Right.
whether or not to spend it and what to spend it on.
And what their priorities are. for- Yeah.
So, and it's twofold, right? So it's a policy that would help the town board make decisions, and then a set of information to give to landowners who might be interested in protecting, which those two documents would be different, right? One's a policy on guiding the town board to make decisions, and the other one is, do you have land you wanna protect? Here's some ways you could do it. Which would include any number of things, like the PDR projects with the state, working with a land trust, like the Finger Lakes Land Trust or the Genesee Valley Conservancy or something. You know, information about how they might be able to do that with a conservation easement, or selling it to the town outright, or selling it to a land trust outright. So we kind of have draft versions of both. And the policy, what it looks like now is basically, it's whether or not how to identify parcels that exist, whether they're for sale or not, you know, here's how to go through and find out what target parcels, I guess. We don't have that list yet. And then the other ones, if you're presented with a property offered by a landowner, whether it's for sale on the MLS listing sites, or if landowner came to the town and said, hey, do you want this? I want to sell it to you, you know, how would you make a decision on it if they want to move forward? And like the methods and the process of doing that are kind of easy, you know, the town board has to decide, do we have enough money, we buy it, this is how we do it. But the identification of the value of the property is the part where we can all think about it in our heads, we know. But I don't wanna assume that the town board knows that. And do they understand it the same way that someone who's got a background in it does? And what could we do that would be helpful on paper to help them come to those decisions? They can listen to people talk all day long, but I think they like having stuff on paper, and that's how we got back to the maps discussion. What if we just had a map? And some people said, well, we have this one, but then my pushback always is, yeah, but it's based on size. Sometimes people have 7 acres, or they have 5 acres, or 10, and it's not gonna show up.
And it was not necessarily based on that specifically targeted goal of acquisition.
Right.
You know, it
Right.
was kind of very like.
We've
well, these are
evolved
things-
a little bit.
Now that you have a targeted goal, you know, getting those specifications and priorities straight on a piece of paper would be more straightforward, because you're not like, it's not amorphous and guessing, you know exactly what you're looking for. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just, another good example is the Vista,
Mhm.
where you had a park and a piece of property, very small, fairly inexpensive, came available adjacent to it.
Mm.
So we purchased that on a whim in like a week. I mean, it was one of those things like you had to buy the thing in
Yeah,
a
we
week.
just bought how big is it? It's like,
7
I keep
acres.
saying
I
7,
don't
but
know
that
that
seems
big.
to be common, apparently. So yeah,
$80,000 for it, yeah.
yeah, we bought it for $70,000 on this map. It's yellow, which is the lowest ranking, but it has a big gully going through it, and it's forested, which to me means it should have been dark blue.
Yeah.
And a funny thing is it doesn't, I don't think it even shows up on this
No.
map, which is the natural resources map, but it has a gully going through it. So I
And
feel
that got
like,
us thinking, well, we can look down below, because then should we be acquiring either an easement or fee simple below to get us to on Linden.
And that's part
Or
of the
on
Parks and
under, rather.
Recreation
Yes,
Trails Master Plan
Yeah.
is to
Connect
connect
them.
Mechanic Park to the lake.
and I
frontage.
think that
Makes that a
that
priority lot.
big project overall, I don't think requires a lot of convincing of the powers that be. I think they, for the most part, agree,
Mhm.
which is why that parcel was able to
Hmm.
go through the purchase process so fast, is that everybody understood it, why it was important to get that, but,
But part of the issue is that when you did this map, the property across the street from it, what did not belong to the land trust at that time, where it does now.
Right, well, that would have
And there
increased-
are some
yeah.
pre-existing trails through that property
Oh.
that bring it down to Route 21, which relatively across the street from the park. So this would allow the continuance of that. Additionally, moving toward a goal of moving down to Westlake Road.
Yeah,
so I guess one of my, sorry, not to interrupt, but just to make sure we're clear is, I don't know if it's possible, but it would be really nice to have a map based on natural resources and conservation value, forest, water, etc., without looking at zoning districts, or whether it's, you know, really little, or I don't know where you want to say on development or not, but just looking at the parcel itself and what's on it, or if it's next to water.
or protected or natural.
Or
or
connecting
recreational.
areas.
Or yeah, because we also have our corridor map that we've spent some
Yep.
time looking at too. You know, could we have like that perfect golden map? Is it possible to create that, or would it just still be an issue of, well, it depends on what you're looking at?
I hate to be defeatist. I think Barb did and you know, there's no perfect ranking system.
No,
And they
there's
would never
not.
pick up that parcel in Mechanic Park, or it would never pick up their RSM. But
Well,
for,
I think it
for
depends
unique
on what.
reasons, those
you
were
look-
valuable. But if you looked at it, it's a nasty little gully with a lot of scrappy
Well, it's a
trees on it.
completely forested parcel
Which
Uh,
makes it
with a gully. That in and of
You wouldn't-
itself,
ecologically valuable.
it makes
so-
it
You wouldn't think
ecologically
it'd be worth
valuable.
70 grand. But
I do.
well, I can appreciate that as well, but I don't know how we can perfect it, because she really did a very,
Oh, I know. I don't want to
very
get rid of any of
extensive
these maps.
weighting, but the weighting was more on size
Yes,
and
which
views and
was a choice, but.
soil types and so on. And you could have a parcel with the nastiest soil in the world, which is probably the RSM project, but
Well,
it's
and
got lake
that's the other
frontage.
thing too, is,
Yeah.
you know, the
There's
soils
no
that are
perfect
best for
solution.
ag
There isn't.
doesn't necessarily mean that they're
Or
best for everything, and if it
your
doesn't have the
friend's
good
parcel.
soils, that they're
You
bad.
know, that's not gonna show up.
Which the project he just mentioned is, that Kevin Mulvaney has been out there and says it is highly valuable to the health of the lake to have a conservation easement on that piece of property. But it's not on the map because it's only 16.5 acres, and it runs along Menteith Creek. And in fact, it owns half of the waterfall, although Kevin thinks it owns all of the waterfall. I'm not really sure because the
But how are you
maps
gonna
not very
capture
clear.
that?
You can't, but
I
You
mean,
can, it's
we can-
forested and it's on a creek.
it's on a creek,
So
it's
in
on,
my,
it's
like,
on
my
a-
heavily weighted opinion towards forests and water, it would show up on my map in my head.
So I have to
Gets
agree that
points.
there's no perfect map,
Yeah,
but you start with your policies and priorities, and then with that filter, you know, we can make a better map. It may be filters for all undeveloped lands that fit those categories, either they're along a creek, or they're forested, or they're on the lake.
yeah. Is it that simple though?
That's how it starts. I mean, that would be a simple GIS exercise.
Do we have our priorities as to?
That would be the first step, right?
I'm not sure, I'm sitting there thinking,
I'm
okay, what has
listing
priority?
them, well, lakefront for watershed protection, lakefront for views, scenic vistas,
Mhm.
stream buffers for water protection, forested areas. You know, I would go back to the ecological communities, you know, the forested and the wetlands. Anything next to a recreational site or a protected land has an extra boost. So that's where we start, and
Yeah,
then you
the-
say, can we filter for
And the higher
that?
priorities would weigh heavier, and then that would determine, you know, where they fall as far as, you know, the value.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't
I don't know about
necessarily
a
have to
weighted-
score them.
Yeah.
You know, we just wanna say, because you wanna use this, it's not that black and white, and I guess we don't wanna
Yeah,
pretend
it's
it
the
is,
engineering,
right?
yeah.
Because when you have the town board, when something comes up, you know, if the town board had these priorities that the committee, you know, maybe put together and, you know, said this would be the priorities for acquisition, you know, these are really important. Does it check all those boxes? And then you can evaluate a parcel once it comes up, you know, rather than always
I
have
wanna,
it selected in advance, cause that might not be possible in every case. You know,
Sure.
you
Yeah,
can do a
I
guide for
feel
that,
like
but
I want-
I don't want you to have the map as the only thing, cause then you'll get in this thing that's not on the map, so.
right,
oh
well, and I don't want anyone to think that.
Yeah.
We're not, our goal isn't to just have the map be the end, you know,
Yeah,
end all be all.
It can help.
Obviously, there's always other circumstances going on, there's always other things happening, but a map that doesn't take away the flexibility of the decisions, that leaves it to what's on it, and is that ecologically important for habitat, water quality protection, corridors, and so forth, you know, land cover types and stuff. And then they can use that plus whatever other things are going on with that parcel to help them make a better decision.
Are there areas which should not be considered for protection? I mean, are there areas that the town has identified as the hubs for development?
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
We have those.
We have our growth nodes, which are mapped. We have 3 identified growth nodes. We call them the MUO, but we
Right.
also, now with the form-based code, all of uptown area.
Right.
So definitely, yeah. I mean, doesn't mean we want them to fill in a wetland in those areas, but
But
that is where we want development.
Right.
the two things that show up in almost any of our master plans are the quality of the lake
Yes.
and the access to the lake. So it seems to me that a map that takes the lake value into account rather than the land value or the scenic view value or ag value, etc., but has the lake value because that really ultimately is the most important thing about Canandaigua, is our lake, because of the value of the water that comes out of it and how much of this area it serves. So when you think of that, you need to think of those two things. In my opinion,
When you
It's
say the lake, are
access
you including the
and-
creeks?
and, well, yes, because
Yeah.
I call them
Feed
creeks, you call them, you're older than I am.
Streams?
Yeah.
Whatever. I'm not a hell of a lot, by the way.
You're not, I'm actually older than
Water-
you.
Water courses, Tom.
But
Yes, that's our new favorite word
Yes.
lately, right?
Yeah.
But those are the things that are really of value, and they're mentioned in the master plans.
Yeah.
And they're valued in the master plans.
So we do a lot of GIS, our GIS group does a lot of that kind of filtering. Just as an example, we're looking for, NYSERDA wants to know where some underutilized sites that would be good for solar are. So there's all these filtering things we gotta build into the model, you know, it's gotta be this, it's gotta be this size, it's gotta be south facing, it can't be farmland, it can't be wetland, it's like all these things, you just throw them in the model. And it spits
And it
out these
spits out
possible sites,
parcels,
and then
yeah.
you have to take it, it's like, well, is that really a good one, is that really a good one, is that really a good one, then you have to evaluate.
And what are the
them all.
neighbors gonna say?
Well,
Nicer.
they're really looking,
Then you
worry
throw
about
that in the
they're
mix.
not looking for things that a developer would want, but more like the things, the garbage sites that are hard to develop to try to get to those, but that's, I digress, but,
Yeah,
you know, it's the same process where you'd say, what are undeveloped, you know, lands? They're in the stream corridor, they're in the Canandaigua Lake watershed, they're forested, and then you'd have your model find those and, you know, build a little spreadsheet for each of those parcels, how they rank.
But
And then you can do
they
a
don't
little-
have to be vacant, though. I
And
mean,
they
there are parcels that
with some open land, I
could
guess, yeah.
have, you know,
Yeah.
a building or even a
Okay.
house on part of it that has potential to be preserved, if not the part with the house, the part, without it. I mean, look at our farms, none of them are completely
Right,
undeveloped.
well, I guess you'd have a size threshold for that.
Yeah.
Whether it's 1 acre or 3 acre or 5 acres, or definitely not bigger than 7. I mean, some of those are tiny, that lakefront, the lakefront, you'd have a different filter.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't put a conservation easement on a 1/4 acre lakefront lot with a house on it.
Yeah.
Unless it's in, not if it has a house on it, but if it's a little access point, you wanna
Yes.
look for those. And so you could maybe scan along the lakes for like frontage, you could do that with, it's not that long, you could go along with your aerials and look and look and look and look and say, oh, maybe that's a corridor, if somebody wanted to sell the cabin and make it a corridor for the town, and their legacy, whatever, you never
That's
know.
right, that's right.
But, so it could be done as a map, but I wouldn't want you to say this is the end all, and, because
No.
the criteria and the selection criteria and the valuation criteria would be kinda like the same thing. These are our priorities for acquisition and conservation. And this is how we scan the town to find the suitable areas, this is our guide map,
And
and these are our selection criteria.
something that might be important to note, I'm sure everybody's already thought of it too, but just so that it's out there. I think for this conversation, we're not worried about farmland,
Well,
because that's valued differently ecologically speaking.
okay,
And I wouldn't wanna muddy the waters with our soil maps and stuff. They're good the way they are, they work,
and
we
you already
understand
have a
it.
process for like selecting those for PDRs, right?
And not that farmland isn't included in open space value, but I wouldn't wanna mess up what we've done with the farmland protection.
Some of those farms have woods and gullies too.
Exactly,
So they
yeah,
would
and
show
so
those
they
in
would
those
show
lists.
up as being important on these maps for that reason, but I don't think it's harmful to our ag protection program if they didn't show up on a map like what we're talking about, because we have that established already. We know what we're looking for with farmland protection. I don't think we need help with mapping for that.
Or you'd wanna have separate criteria too for like the town board acquisition too, because sometimes they buy easements, right?
Yeah.
So you'd have a separate piece of paper for your ag land acquisition than you would for your open space, scenic, natural, ecology acquisition.
Well, there's nothing wrong with having different categories and, I keep coming back to, do we have to rate?
I don't think so.
Because there's kind of a, there's a parcel on the lakefront that's small that has a creek running through it and everything else, that's wonderful. There's a big parcel with a lot of forest on it, also wonderful. And can't we just identify,
Yes.
this
Right.
is, this is this, this is this, so let's color it blue, this is this, so let's color it another happy color, pink. And just, okay, here's everything for all its different values and everything else. And
then
that's,
you can put it on
that's
a-
certainly something you could do
you
in your
know,
layers and
The
everything.
layers, exactly, you can do transparency, like, here's all the lake access parcels that we identified, it's like, well, that's really cool, look at all of that, and then you could like fold in or add and subtract, also forested, so you can see if there are a bunch of things at once,
Yep,
or
if there's
just
a
one
lot
thing.
or if there's one
In
thing.
your priority list, what are your priorities, and I don't know if you wanna rank those as far as what's your top priority, you could, or,
Certainly,
or consider that.
certainly could, but I don't know that we're necessarily looking to be anything more than reactionary. Let's keep an eye out for these things to come up.
But you could have a priority map, as a guide that would meet those criteria that you develop in advance, before you design the model.
I like what you said about, it's more about identifying than ranking.
Yep.
Cause it kinda and what you said, a list of criteria, those can be separate. We know protecting water quality is important, so therefore land that abuts a stream or the lake, it can be a priority. We know having our scenic open spaces is important. We have, and we know keeping, erosion low, therefore leaving them forested is important. So maybe something that's mostly just identifying all that. I don't know, but I still do like the idea of ranking, but only if it works.
Yeah.
Well, I think ranking becomes almost a subjective, that's kind of what this committee is, we've done all of this, here's all of the data and everything else, and if something opportunistically comes up, this is the criteria that can be applied. And for this year, let's focus on looking at feasibility for doing something with these three sections, these three parcels. So I think it can be something that this committee or a different committee just does, it's the evergreen policies.
It's really hard to compare a 3-acre lakefront access parcel to a 100-acre forest. I mean, which one's more important?
Right.
Neither, they're both important,
Right,
right,
so
save them all.
That's why maybe just have the list and the map and show that these meet this criteria, these meet this criteria, those are high priorities, these are high priorities for another reason, and you're ready for anything, as you, I think you're getting that.
Yeah.
And ranking often becomes a battle between priorities.
Right.
Yes, which is what we've, what we've seen with some of the maps.
And on the other side, it's difficult to come up with some kind of, eco-statistical formula that, it can be objective, we're all measuring the same thing, we all have the common set of values in front of us. And we can present it to the town board as something that, if they have a 2-minute attention span on this particular part of the agenda, they can process it. However, does that really capture well some of the values of these parcels?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a trade-off involved. If we bring it down to numbers and metrics, it's useful.
It
It
is,
can be, but
But-
it also is maybe overly simplistic and
Yeah.
arbitrary.
Right.
Whereas if you had a parcel and you had your 5 priorities for acquisition and conservation, and it's like, here's a parcel, this checks 4 out of the 5 boxes, and this one's our top priority because it's lake and waterfront, watershed protection, or it's our top 3 priorities, lake access, watershed protection, and forest. Like, it checks those, and here it is. It's always gonna be qualitative, but you do have data behind it. I mean, you've made these selection criteria with some science behind it, an understanding of the town and why they're important.
so.
Can I
what-
ask you some, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, because I was gonna move to something different.
Okay, can I ask you some process questions? Sure. When we talk about things like, is it a forested lot or that type of thing, is that something you guys build a layer, or does that layer exist in your existing GIS?
Well,
And I'll apologize ahead of time, I was in our GIS system before I came here, it's still up on my desk, so I have been doing maps for the last 3 days, so.
good for
Nice.
you. Well, that would need to be updated from
Okay.
what we have, so that would probably, if we wanted that to be, if that was one of the priority criteria, we'd have to have better data.
Okay, so you're not pulling in from Google or USDA or any of that kind of thing?
It doesn't really exist,
Yeah,
so
so-
Yeah, okay.
you'd start
All
with the ecological communities map, which is what that's based on.
This one that you were talking about forest, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so Barbara, this one shows our forest lands based on that 2002 land
With
cover
some
mapping
with
project,
some
right?
tweaks, right?
Got it.
So our ecological communities layer is that, it's land cover,
That
but
would
like
be the
she said,
starting
it's
point, so if we were making, if
not
that was a top,
100%
if that was
accurate.
a
No,
top
I-
priority, we'd have to overlay that on a more current aerial photo and edit. So that would be a process, that would be necessary, cause it's such an important.
Yeah.
And maybe also use the land cover from satellite from 2019, that's a nice little filter too, so we just overlay all of them and see if we can make it better.
Does the imaging allow you to assess the quality of the forested lands, the maturity of the trees, the health?
Ecologists, some of them are good enough to look at an aerial
Okay,
and figure that
say
out,
this, okay.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we have people who could look at an aerial photo and say, oh, even the land cover from the satellite distinguishes between evergreen and
Right,
deciduous
or
forest, so
deciduous
there's
trees.
something.
Sure.
So we can look at that and then you overlay it and look at it, so you just really have to go through, square by square, the whole town
Yeah.
and do it, so the scoping that out, I won't even venture a guess right now. But, it also depends how detailed, so
Yeah.
if it's just like, ew, close enough, that'd be one price. If you wanted to get the details on, the ecology of every,
Yeah.
square foot, of course, that would be different.
And is that where they used the college students last time?
Yeah, you got it.
Boots on
So
the
they
ground.
used the aerial photos and they, decided whether it was literally all those categories of ecological communities, which are very nice categories, that you can use, but, whether it's a successional northern hardwood forest or a silver maple. Yeah, I'd have to talk to someone who's done that before, the distinguishing the forest types from aerial photos as to what that would take for a whole town to update the database that way.
If I remember right, there were survey cards that came out with that project too.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the mail
Yeah,
to landowners.
cause I got one,
Because some of them, they have to field check.
yeah.
It's like, we think this is this, but we'd like to go look.
Yep.
And then they'd spot check, some of those areas and say, oh, then you have to look at what vegetation's growing there in order to classify it properly, because those are the characteristics. Interesting. I wondered how they did that.
Yeah, we had owned it for like a year and I got one of those, cause we bought our place in 2001. So, yeah, it asked me the cover type, and at that point, it was still ag field, because that's what it had been,
Yeah, but now it's not.
but now it's not.
It's not interesting. Yeah, so I don't know what that would take. And it depends on how detailed you want to go. But, developing the criteria,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's like, well, we have data, it's not completely up to date, but it's better than it was. Maybe that's good enough.
And so some of what you've been talking about today sounds like it's more of a dynamic digital platform instead of printing out maps.
I think you'd benefit from that. And everybody has, is much more comfortable, I think, than used to be.
One GIS is a far cry from what it used to be. It's gotten more user friendly.
The online tools are.
And they're way more, a lot of them are way more user friendly than Encore, for those of you familiar with Encore.
Yeah, everybody's got them now, we
Yeah.
use Story Map, which I love those. So here's our forest, and like, click, 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 oh, that's interesting.
Well, that might be a nice topic for another meeting, a demo of what you
Oh.
guys have done with that.
Which tool do you use?
ArcGIS,
Okay.
online.
Yep.
And that's their branding for Story Map.
Yep, no, understood.
But you see them on all kinds of government.
The
You know,
NRCS
reports.
uses it for soils. I was on there a
Oh,
couple
yeah.
weeks ago. But it's so big that it takes forever to load.
Oh, really? I was doing a
Upgrade
grant
your laptop.
in Pennsylvania, and they had their water quality, the 303 water quality reports. They're all on a story map. It was so interesting. It was so easy to say, oh, this segment is this, and these are the contributing watersheds. That's really nice.
Who knows about LiDAR? How is LiDAR utilized?
For topography.
Okay.
So I think we did that. We used the LiDAR to do that steep slope map.
I used to do that.
You did.
Wow. It's a huge data set.
The Pennsylvania mapping, did that use some different process than we use here?
Nope.
No.
They just put it together in a nice platform to make it user friendly. That was just a big step up for them.
What was the initiative to do so?
The
Is
state
it
of
the-
Pennsylvania. why did they do
Because
that?
of drilling?
Oh, they do have a lot of money for environmental conservation, like a Marcellus fund. That was actually the grant I was writing was for,
That's why I wonder,
watershed. It was like
some,
a stream protection.
you don't think of Pennsylvania as being that advanced.
Yeah.
Sorry, anybody in Pennsylvania, but
No,
it's
they-
interesting. stuff.
They do have I don't know how much money's in it, but
Yeah.
it's
That sounds
dedicated
pretty
to natural
sophisticated,
resources
right.
protection. But it's actually kind of it's easy now, and it didn't used to be. It's just who's jumping on it and saying, hey, we can do this. So they probably have some young bureaucrats who's like, I think we should do a story map. And someone said, okay, go for it. And next thing you know, it's up. But we could totally do a story map. That would be wonderful.
We're pushing up against 11, so I don't want to take up too much time for everybody. I know we have other things to do, but would everybody agree that maybe some more conversations about what Barbara and Labella could do for us is a good idea?
Yeah, even a demonstration would be Can demonstrate.
Would you guys wanna have that in this meeting, or she and I work on it and come back to you?
Well, we should talk about what's in it, but we could mock up a story map demo
Yeah, that's what
for,
I'm
you know, with
thinking,
just what you've got right
Different-
now to show you how it works with the data you have now. I mean, cause the maps are already there, it's just a matter of, you know, you write like a paragraph for each
Mhm.
map and throw things on, it's fun.
And it all revolves around the term value. It may not be realty value, it's ecological value, or whatever the
Well,
word escapes me,
we-
but we're
we-
talking about different values.
They're all different
It's
values.
not assessed value, it's not,
No, I mean, you have
Yeah.
wildlife value, you
Yeah.
have water quality value, you have scenic value, you have
Yeah.
recreational value. And that's why we were talking about ranking,
you
you know,
know,
who's gonna say what's more important, it kinda depends, right? But they're all important, and if you have a parcel that clicks all those boxes, maybe
It's-
that like
yeah.
soars to the top.
I think water quality value is a needed
Yes.
in our area,
Yeah.
is an absolute, not a choice,
Right.
because of what we have to deal with
But
our lake.
if you had a parcel that was like upland and wooded and had beautiful trails, you still might wanna buy it. I don't know. I don't know. That's a policy question.
well, that's what the Vista property is.
Exactly.
So if we could put together the story map with the data we have right now, and it's the same as looking at these, we could at least see where we are and go from there.
Do you want to plan to do this at our next meeting, or do we wanna and just put the policy off for a little while and focus on this for a little bit?
Well, you can't really do one without the other, can you?
Well, our policy kind of, I mean, it's drafted, but it's kind of, if we had something like that already in place, it would definitely be mentioned in the policy.
I mean, the story map won't give you anything you don't already have, it's just a platform.
It's just a different way to
It's
look
just
at
a
it.
platform, so I think if you really want to advance your selection process, you need to hammer out the criteria.
But the story map will do the overlay, which is what was missing when we looked at these last month, the month before.
Yeah, but the data's still the same.
Data's still the same, it's just a matter of seeing it all.
And we don't have, you know, those other pieces that I think you want, like the lake access.
Oh, for
points
sure,
and stuff like
I
that,
think
so-
that will help us identify where there are holes and where we wanna, my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, you do, so if you've looked at every one of these maps, you know what resources are already mapped.
Mhm.
And what's not on these maps aren't mapped, you know, so there are definitely things missing,
Absolutely.
and they're not incorporated into the parcel rating, but even leaving that aside, the parcel rating just is all of these maps put together with weighting criteria.
Right.
Either they're near a public land, they've got the water, the streams going through them, or within so many feet of a stream, or along so many feet of the lake, you know, that was one of the criteria, there was a size filter.
Yeah.
So that got rid of some, I think it was 3 acres. But maybe it
Doesn't
was
say
5,
on
or
here,
maybe it was
does it?
5 or 10, I can't remember off the top of my head. You know, whether it has scenic views, so these are all the maps,
Oh yeah, it doesn't say, it just says based on the number of acres and then these weighting
yeah,
factors.
it was a small, number, maybe, it might have been 3 or 5, it might have been 5. So, I mean, demoing the story map without having a better sense, you know, without having all the data. I'll show you a link to a story map so you can see how it works.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you
Yeah,
wanna share
yeah,
that,
that
I
would be
can
great.
share it with them in an email
Yeah,
after today.
Just to show, even if it's not one of ours, but. you know,
As an
Yeah.
example of
just
what
as
it would
some-
look like, yeah.
I
Yeah.
When,
think in
when
some of
is the next
Pennsylvania
meeting?
one,
Cause
that's
I know we're
cool.
gonna run
And
into
story maps can
Thanksgiving.
be continually updated, right? They're a dynamic
Yeah, just
type
like,
of project.
you may update the online map, and sometimes, you know, if we're hosting the online map, you know, they can be edited, you know, to add things. You wanna
Okay.
be careful about that, because it's, you know, your definitive data source, so you wanna go through a process to do that.
So our next meeting is planned for November 18th. It's the Friday before Thanksgiving week. for that meeting, what do we wanna do? So before then, we will have had a chance to look at this link. My original plan was that we would spend the November meeting looking at the policy again. Maybe that's still okay to plan for that, because between now and then, it's not like we'll be ready to make any big decisions on mapping, but at least we will have been able to look at it. And then maybe after that day, we'll talk about maybe having you come back.
Yeah, I mean, what would be helpful for you going forward is to really nail down what the town's priorities should be
Priorities.
for acquisition, and make a list of some of the land features that aren't already mapped, that would need to be part of that pool,
Yeah.
you know, of possible acquisition parcels.
So are you hosting for the town these maps already
No,
as data sets?
no,
Okay.
they're just,
They have the data, they have the GIS layers and the map files themselves. We have them online, but obviously they're just images of,
I mean,
nothing's dynamic.
I don't know if you have the GIS or do that, but I don't know how
You
that-
might have sent
do.
us some of it, but,
You know,
the shape files, but to my knowledge, we have one as relicense in the building,
okay,
and it's used by our code enforcement officer. He uses it for a lot of the outfall mapping for stormwater stuff.
yeah, I'll talk to one of my colleagues who's done, you know, a lot of the online mapping, see how hard it would be to just pop some things up to show you other than that, I'll just give you. There's some great story maps that have been done by other people, so.
Yeah, maybe between now and then too, I can show you the policy so you can kind of see where we've started
Okay,
at least. Okay,
and then think about, you know, for future mapping, how far you need to go to make it useful. You know, because it's still a guide, you can still look at the aerials at parcel by parcel and
Yeah.
update it, but.
Or what's typical as far as revisiting maps, going back and amending them at every 5 years, every 10 years? I mean, like I said, things change.
Well,
You don't
the
wanna-
issue with these maps is that some of this data goes back to 2002.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's kind of a problem, because
yeah, we can't
forests
update
have
it.
grown up since then, right? You know,
Or have come down.
Trees have
or
died,
come down,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the urgency with some of these other data sets. They haven't changed at all, like the slopes are still the same, the
Oh, yeah.
streams are still the same, so.
Mhm.
But the parcels have changed too, you know, they've changed ownership, of course, and
Lines
Yeah.
have
been
changed,
subdivided and developed, so.
Yeah, the ash blight took out a lot of
Oh,
trees,
yeah,
yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
my forest isn't the same.
Oh, it's sad.
That's true, that's one of the things, we have that, community, ecological community, the silver maple ash swamp, and I'm constantly thinking, they're gonna have to change the name, cause now it's just gonna be silver maple and then whatever grows up.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
true,
'cause-
yeah.
Cause
The planning
Not
board meetings,
viable
everybody
anymore.
says, oh, there's no swamp there. So, well, it doesn't have to be water, just silver maples, that's.
We'll sit down with my buddy Adam, who did that presentation on
right,
the ecology mapping. He's very fluent in all of those community type, because that's what they do. They go out and say, this is a community, look at all the plants,
yeah,
measure the soil, you know, wetness or whatever, and figure out what community it is.
Very dynamic.
At some point, do you see us, after certain properties have been identified with a number of desirable values, you see us having to go out and do site visits?
Well, if it comes up to, you know, either for a development review or for purchase,
Yeah.
you'd want to verify, absolutely, or send someone knowledgeable out to verify.
Right.
well, and one of the pieces of the draft
I like that.
policy is that some of these, potential acquisitions, be it a conservation easement or an outright purchase, are gonna probably be a recommendation from this group. So, I mean, that's how the draft is written right now, either from this group or, just from like the town manager or whatever, but based on probably this group.
Yeah.
Doing some sort of a review. The group has changed and, this new idea is kind of not quite solidified yet. So, what our job might be isn't totally defined.
But if it was scored high or
Self-preservation.
checked the box of ecological value, That's something you really have to check.
Mm-hmm.
If it was Lakeview, you probably can know that intuitively. If a gully rolls through there, you already know that. If it's a steep slope, you know that. But if it's ecological or wildlife value or corridor, you have to check because those things do change over time. I mean, and we did those corridor mapping based on the ecological communities and the streams, you know, when
Right.
you kind of make connections based on
Yeah, this
the
one.
natural connections, yeah. That was a neat one, yeah.
Yeah.
We had an ecologist act, work on that, to make it realistic as much as you can on a big level, without going there and checking. They love to check, they don't like to say, oh, maybe maps, they like to go out there in the field and say it's right here, but.
Yeah, I mentioned the Environmental Bond Act early on, which is gonna be voted on soon. And that actually had a lot of money for open space, for ag and forest PDRs, and so something that I would think this group could potentially be involved with and
Yeah,
taking advantage of those resources.
it sounds like if that passes, there could be more, funding opportunities.
Exactly.
But there's a lot already, I mean, with the water quality and the WQIP, have you done those grants before for like stream buffers?
The ones that are the source water protection stuff from
There's source
DEC?
water and the WQIP, they like both kind of do the same thing,
Yeah, not, well, no, not really.
but that's another source, through DEC.
Yeah, there's the one program where if you have I can't remember, it's like the V2W something SP, I can't remember the difference, but it was almost like you could get a grant to come up with a source water protection plan
Yeah.
that identifies land that's protecting your drinking water, which is kind of funny for us. It's pretty much every stream that goes to Canandaigua Lake,
Yeah.
every single one. And then use that or have that in place, and then you could get grants to buy those parcels or protect them somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
We haven't done that plan. We don't have one of those plans.
Well, it would,
but we
it would be the town, I guess, I mean, it might be the city,
could be, yeah.
that would be. 'Cause
But
we're
for the
doing one
land
for
in the town, I mean, it's still our drinking water.
It would cover the whole watershed.
Right.
I mean, we're doing one for Auburn, Wasco Lake, right? So it's very similar. It's like the whole watershed.
Yeah.
I'm not personally working on it, but yeah, and then that gives you a plan. But the grant funding, or there's a source water protection through ag and markets, or is that the EC2, where it's a grant for a buffer for stream buffers, and you can buy permanent easements or long-term easements. And then there's the WQIP, which you can buy land.
There is one that's through soil and water.
That's the one, yeah.
Well, it's through DEC for soil and water conservation districts.
Yeah,
The
there's a
source
few
water
of them.
buffer program, something
Yes, that's
they
the one. So you haven't done those yet, but you're aware of them.
No, because according to DEC, it's through soil and water,
And they are,
not
and
municipalities.
they don't have interest in it, or?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they've done some stuff, but
There's several of them, but, those are all your watersheds going into the
yeah.
lake, that, there's a big emphasis on that, because it protects the water supply, so you score high points for those. Stream protection, it's kind of my big thing. It's like, you don't wanna farm too close to the stream, you don't wanna get rid of the vegetation, you wanna have a buffer, so if you can buy those buffers, that would be a high priority, put that on your list.
It is, streams, anything
Stream.
touching a stream.
Riparian buffers, yeah.
All right, well, we'll call it quits for that for today. I'll communicate a little more before our next meeting on what exactly we'll go over at the next meeting. And can you stay for a few minutes, or do you have to go? Okay, and I can show you some of the other stuff, and ask a couple questions, but, look for an email from me early next week, probably with the link you talked about, with
Yeah,
an
I'll send,
example.
just so you can see what I mean, I'll probably send like Pennsylvania's, cause that's just on the top of mind.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, well, thanks, everybody.
And you do have the existing shape files?